The rope creaked as the pit master hauled it taut, and the crowd at Wingate Market roared for blood. "Fight her!" Someone bellowed from the wooden stands ringing the dueling pit, and 100 voices took up the chant, boots stamping on planks slick with spilled ale. Down in the churned dirt of the pit, Urzoth Steeljaw stood with her twin hand axes loose at her sides, green skin gleaming with sweat under the mountain sun, 3 human challengers already sprawled and groaning in the mud behind her. She had not even drawn breath hard. Weston, the pit master, a barrel-chested man named Dennick Rourke, pointed a thick finger up at the caravan guards clustered near the rope line. "You're next. Best blade in the whole convoy, they tell me. Come show the orc what Wingate men are made of." Simon Weston did not move. He stood with his arms crossed over a plain leather jerkin scuffed pale at the elbows, a working man's sword belted at his hip, the same sword he used to fend off wolves and bandits on the long haul up Asheville Pass, never once to entertain a crowd of drunks who had paid good coin to watch someone bleed. The other guards were already grinning, slapping his shoulders, shoving him toward the rope as if this were some grand honor. Simon planted his boots and did not budge an inch. "No," he said. The word landed strange in the noise, small and flat, but it carried. Rourke's smile faltered. "No, man, there's 40 silver marks riding on this bout. The orcs cleared the field. Somebody's got to stand up or I refund half of Wingate." "Then refund it," Simon said. "I didn't come up this mountain to fight a woman for sport." A ripple went through the crowd, half laughter, half jeers. Someone threw a rind of bread that caught Simon on the shoulder. But down in the pit, Urzoth Steeljaw went very still. She had fought 12 men in 6 markets since spring thaw. She had broken wrists, cracked ribs, sent grown men weeping into the dirt while their friends cheered and wagered coin on her like. She was a prize bull at auction. Not one of them had ever hesitated before stepping into that circle with her, eager for the chance to say they'd traded blows with an orc and lived. She had stopped expecting anything else from these mountain markets, stopped expecting to be seen as anything but a spectacle in green skin. She looked up at the human guard who had just refused free coin and easy glory, and something in her chest, long since armored over, cracked open half an inch. "Afraid, human." She called loud enough for the stands to hear, because pride demanded she say something, even as her dark eyes studied him with new and sudden interest. Simon met her gaze across the pit, unflinching. "No," he said again, quieter now, meant only for her though the whole market heard it. "Just not interested in making a show of hurting you for men who will forget your name by morning." The crowd booed. Rourke cursed and spat and began shouting for anyone else willing to step up. And eventually, a drunk blacksmith's apprentice stumbled into the pit to be thrown twice as hard and twice as fast as the others. Because Urzoth Steeljaw fought that bout with her jaw tight and her mind 3 feet to the left, on a lean, sandy-haired guard who had looked at her like she was a person and not a prize. Wingate Market sat at the head of Asheville Pass, the last flat ground before the road climbed into switchbacks of scree and snow that separated the human lowlands from the orc clan territories beyond the peaks. It had grown up around the old stone walls of Hallowmount Monastery, whose gray-robed brothers had declared the place neutral ground 2 generations back when the last war between humans and orcs had finally burned itself out into an uneasy, grudging peace. Now caravans wound up from the lowland towns loaded with salt, cloth, and iron tools, and orc traders came down from the high valleys with furs, worked stone, and the pale mountain silver their smiths prized above gold. Twice a year the clans sent envoys to renew the treaty that let both peoples use the pass, and twice a year Wingate swelled with tents and wagons, and the particular tension of 2 proud peoples doing business who still, under the surface, did not entirely trust one another. Simon Weston had walked that pass for 6 seasons now, guarding merchant trains for coin that kept a roof over the small room he rented above a Wingate stable and put boots on his feet come winter. He was not a rich man. He was not, by most measures, a remarkable 132 years old, broad through the shoulders from years of labor, quiet by nature, more comfortable checking a wagon axle or calming a spooked mule than trading boasts in a tavern. The other guards liked him well enough but did not seek him out. He kept to himself, ate his suppers alone, and had buried whatever ambition he'd once carried somewhere on the road years back, content simply to do honest work and hurt no one who did not first try to hurt him. He had seen the dueling pits before. Every market season, Rourke set up his ring and his gambling boards, and every season some fresh orc fighter, usually young, usually proud, usually needing coin as badly as any human, was goaded into fighting for the crowd's amusement. Simon had never joined in, but he had never spoken against it either, not until today. Not until he had watched Urzoth Steeljaw stand in that pit with 3 broken men behind her, and something tired and lonely behind her eyes that no one in the stand seemed to notice at all. He found her an hour later at the edge of the orc encampment, a cluster of hide tents pitched in the shadow of the monastery's outer wall, where the Steeljaw delegation had made camp for treaty season. She was seated on an overturned crate, wrapping fresh linen around her knuckles, still dressed in her fitted warrior's leather's dark, oiled hide cut close through the waist and hips, banded with iron rings across the chest and shoulders. A wide leather sash knotted at her hip holding her twin axes, tall boots laced to the knee. She was tall even for an orc, all long muscle and clean, deliberate strength, tusks small and neat where they showed at the corners of her mouth, black hair braided back from a face that was, Simon thought, plainly and startlingly beautiful in a way the market crowd seemed determined not to see. "You've come to apologize for costing my pit master his 40 marks, Urzoth said without looking up, or you've come to gawk like the rest of them." "Neither," Simon said. "I came to see if you were hurt." That made her look up. Her dark eyes narrowed, assessing him the way she might assess a stranger's blade before a bout, searching for the trick, the hidden edge. "I have fought men twice your size today and not taken a scratch. Why would I be hurt?" "Not on the outside," Simon said, and then, hearing how it sounded, felt his ears go warm. "Forget I said that. I only meant it's a poor way to spend an afternoon breaking bones for coin you don't even see. I wondered if anyone had asked you if you wanted that." Urzoth set down the linen. For a long moment she only looked at him, and Simon made himself hold still under it, the way he'd learned to hold still under a spooked horse's eye, patient, unthreatening. "No one asks," she said finally. "My clan needed coin for the winter stores, and Rourke pays well for a Steeljaw name in his pit. I am good at it. That is not the same as wanting it." She flexed her bandaged hand slowly. "You are the first human at this market in 2 years who has looked at me and seen anything but a wager." "Then Wingate's been keeping poor company," Simon said. A short, surprised laugh cracked out of her, gone as quickly as it came, as though she'd forgotten she still had one in her. "You have a strange way of talking, caravan man." "Simon," he said. "Simon Weston. Urzoth Steeljaw." She said it like a challenge, like a blade laid on a table between them, daring him to flinch at the weight of her clan name. He did not. "You refuse to fight me in front of half the market. Do you know what that will cost you? Men will call you a coward. They will say you feared an orc woman." "Let them," Simon said. "I've been called worse for less good reason." Urzoth studied him a moment longer, something shifting behind her eyes, wary and curious both at once. "You are either very brave," she said slowly, "or very foolish." "Might be both," Simon admitted, and this time when she laughed, it lasted a little longer, and something in his chest loosened that he had not known was tight. The treaty envoys spent 3 weeks at Wingate every autumn, hammering out grazing rights and toll fees, and the endless small grievances that came from 2 peoples sharing one narrow mountain road. And this season Simon found himself, almost without deciding to, spending most of his free hours at the edge of the Steeljaw camp. He told himself it was only curiosity, only the plain decency of checking that a woman half the market treated like livestock was being fed and housed properly. Urzoth told herself, with equal unconvincing firmness, that she merely tolerated the human guard because he was more interesting than the monastery's endless prayers and Rourke's endless wagers, and because a woman charged with protecting her clan's honor on foreign ground could use an ally who did not flinch at green skin. Neither of them believed their own excuses for very long. It began, as these things sometimes do, with a contest neither of them could resist walking away from. "You wear that sword like it is a burden," Urzoth said one gray morning, watching Simon oil his blade outside the guard's bunkhouse. "A caravan man's sword, made for scaring off wolves, not for fighting." "It's kept me alive 6 seasons," Simon said mildly. "That's more than most fine swords manage." Alive is not the same as skilled. She crossed her arms, tusks catching the light as she smiled, sharp and pleased with herself. "I have watched you drill with the other guards. You are competent, you are not fast." "High praise," Simon said dryly. "I could put you on your back in 4 strokes." "Could you?" He set down his oiling cloth, unable to keep the corner of his mouth from twitching upward. "Is that a challenge, Steeljaw?" "It is an observation," she said, though her eyes gleamed with exactly the challenge she claimed she hadn't offered. "But if your pride cannot bear an observation, I would not object to proving it." So it began not in Rourke's pit, not for coin or crowds, but in a scrubby clearing behind the monastery's kitchen gardens, where the two of them met at dawn, blunted practice blades in hand, and traded blows until they were both breathing hard and grinning despite themselves. She was, as she'd promised, faster than him, stronger than him, more experienced in a dozen ways that should have made the contest embarrassing. But Simon had spent 6 years reading the small warnings a body gives before it moves a shift of weight, a tightening shoulder, and he used every scrap of that patience against her, absorbing her attacks, waiting, wearing her down instead of matching her force for force. The first morning she put him on his back in 4 strokes, exactly as promised. By the 5th morning it took her 11. By the 2nd week she was laughing outright when he finally found the gap in her guard and touched his blunted blade to her ribs, both of them collapsing into the frost-crisped grass, breathless and grinning at each other like fools. "You are stubborn," she told him, still catching her breath, staring up at the pale morning sky. "Like a mule that will not be led." "Mules get where they're going eventually," Simon said, and turned his head to find her already looking at him. And for one long, charged moment neither of them said anything at all, the space between their hands in the grass narrower than it had been a heartbeat before. She sat up first, tugging her braid back over her shoulder, and the moment passed, but it left something behind it, a warmth that did not fully fade even hours later when Simon was back to checking wagon axles and Urzoth was back among her clan's envoys, arguing toll rates with a monastery clerk. It was not only sparring that drew them together. Wingate's market days were loud, crowded affairs, stalls packed shoulder to shoulder along the muddy central lane, and it did not take long for Simon to notice how the human vendors treated Urzoth when she came to trade. The way they overpriced her goods, the way mothers pulled their children a little too visibly out of her path, the way old grudges from the last war still lived just under the surface of every polite transaction. He began walking the market with her when their schedules allowed, not because she needed protecting. She needed that from no one and made that clear the first time he tried, but because she deserved, he thought, at least one person in this narrow, prejudiced little trading post who stood beside her rather than around her. The confrontation came on a bright, cold afternoon 3 weeks into treaty season, when a cloth merchant named Faris refused outright to sell Urzoth a length of good gray wool, sliding it away from her reaching hand with a sneer that carried clear across the stall. "Not for orc coin," Faris said. "Go trade with your own kind." "Her coin spends the same as anyone's," Simon said, stepping up beside her before he'd fully decided to, his voice carrying an edge the market rarely heard from him. A small crowd had already begun to gather, drawn by raised voices the way crowds always were. "Sell her the wool, Faris, or explain to the monastery brothers why you're breaking neutral ground custom over a bolt of cloth." Faris's face reddened. "You take an orc's side over a Wingate man's, Weston." "I'd take the side of whoever's not cheating a paying customer," Simon said evenly. "That's all this is. Coin's coin." Urzoth said nothing through any of it, standing very straight, chin lifted, refusing to give the gathering crowd the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. But Simon saw the small, fierce gratitude flicker across her face when Ferris finally, grudgingly, slapped the wool down on the counter and took her coin without another word. They walked away together through the muttering crowd, and it was Urzoth, not Simon, who reached over and briefly, deliberately, pressed her hand against his forearm. "You did not need to do that," she said quietly. "I know," Simon said. "Wanted to anyway. Most humans would not have." "Most humans are wrong about a lot of things," Simon said, and the look she gave him then, warm and unguarded for just a moment before the market crowd forced her armor back into place, stayed with him long after the sun went down. It was 2 nights later that Urzoth found the seal. She had gone, at her clan chieftain's request, to retrieve a lockbox of treaty documents from the tent shared by the human negotiating party. An ordinary errand, sanctioned by both sides, the kind of small trust the peace process required. But the tent was empty when she arrived, its occupant, a sharp-eyed lowland officer named Captain Aldrich Vance, absent on some errand of his own, and it was on the trestle table beside the lockbox that she saw it. A half-finished letter, sealed with Vance's own signet, addressed to a garrison commander in the lowlands. She should not have read it. She read it anyway, because something in the opening line, "The Steeljaw delegation will be dealt with as arranged during the signing ceremony," froze the blood in her veins. She read it twice more before she understood the whole of it. Vance meant to have the entire Steeljaw envoy killed during the treaty signing itself, staged to look like bandit raiders, and the blame laid at the feet of a rival human faction, so that war would reignite along the pass. A war that would let Vance's lowland patrons seize the iron vein mines beneath the mountain. Mines the Steeljaw clan currently held sole rights to under the old treaty. It was all there in Vance's own hand. Names, dates, the bribed guards who would look away, the false trail of evidence already being planted. Urzoth took the letter. She knew, tearing it free of its wax seal with shaking hands, that she had just made herself the most hunted woman on the mountain. She found Simon in the guard's bunkhouse stable, mending a bridle strap by lamplight, and the look on her face when she pulled him outside into the cold dark told him something was badly wrong before she said a single word. "I need you to read something," she said, "and then I need you to tell me I am wrong, because if I am right, half this mountain is about to burn." She laid the letter in his hands, and Simon read it once by lamplight, his face going pale and still, and then read it again. "This is Vance's seal," he said quietly. "I've seen it on requisition orders. It is. He means to slaughter your whole delegation, at the signing, and blame it on raiders." Simon looked up at her, and something in his chest twisted painfully at the fear he could see, carefully leashed, behind her composed expression. "Urzoth, if this gets out before you can prove it, if Vance even suspects you have it, I know what he will do," she said. "I have known him 3 seasons. He is not a man who leaves loose ends." She took the letter back, folding it with careful, controlled hands, tucking it inside her leathers against her chest like something that might yet burn her. "I must get this to the abbot. Hallowmount's word is trusted by both sides. If he reads this before the signing—" "Then let's go now," Simon said, already reaching for his sword belt. "It is midnight. Vance won't wait for morning if he realizes it's missing," Simon said. "Neither should we." They moved through the sleeping market together under a sky thick with stars, keeping to the shadows between tents, Urzoth's hand resting lightly and often on the hilt of one axe. It was in the narrow alley between the monastery's outer wall and the old grain stores that Vance's men found them 3 lowland soldiers, faces half hidden by hoods, blocking the path with drawn blades before Simon had even registered the danger. "Give us the letter, Orc," one of them said, "and maybe you walk out of this pass alive." Urzoth's twin axes were in her hands before he finished speaking, but 3 against 2 in a narrow alley was poor odds even for a Steeljaw warrior, and Simon put himself at her shoulder without hesitation, sword drawn, heart hammering. "You don't want to do this," Simon said, keeping his voice level though his pulse was anything but. "Whatever Vance is paying you, it isn't worth hanging for." Funny words from a man about to bleed defending an orc. The soldier sneered and lunged. What followed was fast and ugly, and mercifully brief. Urzoth moved like something poured rather than stepped, one axe catching a blade and turning it aside while the other came around in a blow that dropped the first soldier gasping to the cobbles, disarmed rather than killed. She did not want bodies that would need explaining any more than Simon did. Simon caught the second man's strike on his sword and drove his shoulder into him hard enough to slam him into the grain store wall, the breath leaving the man in a woof that ended the fight better than any blade could have. The third soldier took one look at his fallen companions and fled into the dark, and Urzoth let him go, chest heaving, eyes bright with adrenaline and something else beneath it. "You're hurt," Simon said, seeing the shallow cut along her forearm where a blade had grazed her before he could reach her. "It is nothing. Let me see." He caught her arm gently before she could pull away, and for once she let him, standing very still in the dark alley while he examined the cut by starlight, his thumb brushing careful and light along the edge of undamaged skin above the wound. Her breath caught, quiet but unmistakable, and when he looked up his face was very close to hers, close enough that he could see the flecks of amber in her dark eyes, close enough that the noise of the fight and the danger and the letter burning against her chest all seemed, for one suspended moment, very far away. "Simon," she said low, and it was the first time she had used his given name without an edge of challenge in it. "I'm not sorry I came with you," he said quietly. "Whatever happens next." Her free hand came up, hesitant in a way nothing about her ever was, and rested against his jaw, rough calluses and gentle pressure both at once. "No one has ever stood beside me without being ordered to," she murmured. "Not like this." "Then everyone else has been a fool," Simon said, and closed the last inch of distance between them. The kiss was not soft, not at first. It carried all the fear and adrenaline of the fight still singing in both their blood, hungry and searching, her hand fisting in the front of his jerkin to pull him closer, his arm sliding around her waist like he'd been waiting his whole quiet life for permission to do exactly that. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing unsteadily, Urzoth pressed her forehead briefly against his, a strange tenderness for a woman built of iron and violence. "We do not have time for this," she whispered, though she made no move to step away. "No," Simon agreed. "We don't." Neither of them moved for another long moment anyway before the weight of the letter and the danger reasserted itself, and they broke apart to hurry the rest of the way to the monastery gates. The abbot, an elderly, sharp-minded man named Brother Aldous, read the letter twice by candlelight in his small stone study, his expression darkening with each line. "This is treason against the treaty," he said finally, "and mass murder besides. If this is genuine, it bears Vance's own seal," Urzoth said. "I would stake my clan's honor on its truth." "Then we must move carefully," Brother Aldous said. "Vance's allies among the lowland garrison commanders. If we accuse him without ironclad proof before the signing, he will simply claim the letter is forged, a fabrication meant to disgrace him and inflame the clans. We need more than his word against yours." "There isn't time to gather more," Simon said. "The signing is in 4 days. "Then we have 4 days," the abbot said grimly, "to find it." Vance moved faster than any of them expected. By the following evening, word had spread through Wingate Market, quietly at first, then in ugly, gathering whispers, that a Steeljaw warrior had attacked and gravely wounded 2 lowland soldiers in the night, unprovoked, and stolen valuable garrison correspondence. Simon heard the story from 3 different market stalls before midday, each version worse than the last, and understood with sick clarity what Vance was doing, turning the truth inside out, making Urzoth the criminal before anyone could learn what she actually carried. He found her at the Steeljaw camp, her chieftain, a grim, gray-tusked warrior named Steeljaw, Urzoth's elder cousin and the delegation's leader, standing beside her with his arms crossed and worry etched deep into his weathered face. "They mean to arrest her," Threx said without preamble when Simon arrived. "Vance has convinced the market magistrate that Urzoth assaulted his men without cause. If she is taken into human custody before the signing, then Vance controls the narrative completely," Simon finished grimly. "He can claim whatever he wants about the letter once she's locked away, and no one will believe her." "I will not run," Urzoth said flatly, though Simon could see the tightness around her eyes. "Running proves nothing but guilt. I would rather stand and be judged fairly." "Vance isn't interested in fair judgment," Simon said. "He needs you silenced one way or another before the signing. If they arrest you," he did not get to finish, because that was the moment the magistrate's guards arrived, 6 of them, spears leveled, a warrant scroll bearing the market seal held aloft by a nervous-looking deputy who clearly wanted no part of arresting an orc warrior, but had been given no choice. "Urzoth Steeljaw," the deputy announced, voice cracking slightly, "you are charged with assault upon the king's soldiers and theft of official correspondence. You will surrender yourself for judgment." Threx's hand went to his weapon, but Urzoth caught his wrist, shaking her head once sharply. "No," she said. "Not here. Not with half the market watching and Vance waiting for an excuse to call it clan aggression." She stepped forward, chin high, and let the guards bind her wrists, though every line of her body screamed against the indignity of it. Simon moved to intervene and found her dark eyes fixed on him, silently pleading not for rescue, but for restraint. "Trust the letter," she said quietly as the guards led her away. "Trust the abbot. Do not do anything foolish, Simon Weston." He watched her go, hands bound, spine straight, refusing to bow her head for the growing crowd that had gathered to watch an orc warrior march through the market square, and something in his chest burned with a fury he had rarely felt in his life. He did not do anything foolish. Not yet. Instead, he went straight to Brother Aldous, and together with Steeljaw, they spent the next 2 days combing through every scrap of correspondence, every ledger, every whispered rumor they could find, searching for the proof that would unmask Vance before it was too late. They found it on the 3rd day in the unlikeliest of places, a drunken lowland soldier at Wingate's one tavern, one of the men who had fled the alley fight, now terrified enough of the noose himself to trade information for leniency. He confirmed everything: Vance's plan, the bribed garrison witnesses, the staged bandit raid planned for the signing ceremony itself. Brother Aldous had the confession written and sealed before the soldier could think better of it. But Vance, warned somehow of the net closing around him, perhaps by a spy among the monastery's own staff, perhaps simply by his own cornered instincts, moved his plan forward before anyone could act on the confession. The morning of what should have been the 4th day, Wingate Market woke to find a gallows already built in the central square, and Urzoth Steeljaw, still bound, being marched toward it under Vance's personal order, his own falsified charge sheet declaring her guilty of murder. The 2 wounded soldiers from the alley, he claimed, had died overnight of their injuries, a lie Simon would later learn was manufactured entirely, the men very much alive and hidden away in a garrison tent. But in that terrible moment, with the whole market gathering to watch, with the noose already swinging from the crossbeam and Vance standing beside the gallows with cold satisfaction on his face, the lie was doing exactly what he needed it to do. "Orcs murder our soldiers in the night and steal from honest men," Vance called out to the crowd, his voice carrying practiced, poisonous authority. "And still there are those who would call them our equals, our trading partners, our neighbors. Today the law of this pass reminds you all what an orc's word is worth." The crowd, frightened, confused, some of them already half convinced by 3 days of ugly rumor, did not intervene as the executioner led Urzoth up the gallows steps. Steeljaw and a dozen clan warriors stood at the edge of the square, weapons drawn, held back only by the desperate calculation that drawing steel now would confirm every lie Vance had told and ignite the very war he wanted. Brother Aldous was pushing through the crowd with the confession scroll held high, shouting for the magistrate to halt the proceedings, but the square was packed too thick, his old legs too slow, and Vance's own men were deliberately blocking his path. Simon Weston did not think. He ran. He shoved through the crowd with a strength born of pure animal terror, ignoring the shouts and curses of people he knocked aside, his eyes fixed only on the gallows platform where the executioner was settling the noose around Urzoth's neck. On Urzoth's face, still proud, still defiant, but for the first time since he had known her, afraid. Their eyes met across the square in the half-second before the executioner reached for the lever, and Simon saw in her expression something that broke his heart even as it drove his legs faster. Not a plea for rescue, but a silent, resigned farewell, as though she had already accepted this was how her story ended and only regretted that his would go on without her. He would not accept that ending. Simon reached the gallows steps a bare heartbeat before the lever released, vaulting the low rail rather than climbing the stairs, drawing his sword in the same motion, and brought the blade down across the taut rope in a single, desperate stroke, just as the trapdoor beneath Urzoth's feet fell away. The rope parted with a sound like a snapped bowstring, and Urzoth dropped, not to a broken neck, but straight down through the open trapdoor, and Simon threw himself after her, catching her falling weight against his own body, and taking the impact of the fall hard against his shoulder, rather than let her hit the ground beneath the platform unbraced. They landed together in a tangled heap in the shadowed space beneath the gallows, both gasping, Simon's arms locked around her as though he could shield her from the entire square with nothing but his own body. Above them, chaos erupted. The crowd screamed and scattered. Vance was shouting for his men to seize them both. But Brother Aldous had finally broken through to the platform's edge, the confession scroll and Vance's own damning letter held aloft, his old voice somehow carrying over the tumult with the authority of decades spent commanding silence in a chapel. "Hold," the abbot thundered. "This execution is built on lies. I hold here a signed confession in Captain Vance's own hand, proving this entire charge was fabricated to murder the Steeljaw envoy and reignite war along this pass. The soldiers she is accused of killing live still, hidden in the garrison camp not 200 yards from where we stand. Someone bring them forward, and let this square see the truth before another drop of blood is spilled." The magistrate, pale and furious at having been so thoroughly used, sent runners to the garrison camp within minutes, and it took less than half an hour for the truth to unravel completely in front of the entire market. The two supposedly murdered soldiers marched out very much alive, Vance's own bribed witnesses breaking under the magistrate's hard questioning. The confession scroll read aloud to a crowd that had, moments before, been baying for an execution, and now stood in stunned, furious silence at how close they had come to watching an innocent woman hang for a lie. Vance did not wait to be formally condemned. He bolted for the market gates, shoving through the crowd, but Threk Steeljaw and his warriors, no longer bound by the need for restraint, ran him down before he'd made it 50 yards, and it was Urzoth herself pulled up from beneath the gallows by Simon's hands, throat raw but unbroken, legs unsteady but standing, who walked forward through the parting crowd and stood over the man who had tried to have her killed twice in 3 days. "You wished war," she said, voice hoarse but steady, loud enough for the whole square to hear. "You wished my people dead and my clan's mine stolen, and you were willing to burn this pass to ash to have it. I will not give you the satisfaction of my anger. I will give you the magistrate's judgment instead, and let every soul in this market see that Steeljaw honor does not answer lies with more lies." It was, Simon thought later, watching her stand tall and unbroken in the ruins of Vance's plot, the single most magnificent thing he had ever witnessed, more magnificent even than the sight of her in the dueling pit, because this was not strength performed for a crowd's entertainment but strength that had simply always been there, waiting for the world to finally see it clearly. Simon reached her side as the guards dragged Vance away in chains, and she turned to him, and for once neither of them cared who was watching. She reached up and pressed her palm flat against his chest, right over his hammering heart, and he covered her hand with his own. "You cut the rope," she said, still hoarse, still disbelieving. "You could have been killed." Vance's men had blades drawn on the platform. "I know," Simon said. "Why would you risk that for me?" Simon thought of the pit that first day, of the crowd baying for a duel he'd refused to give them, of every quiet morning since spent learning the particular fierce, guarded warmth of her. "Because you're not a wager to me," he said. "You never were. I told you that the first day, and I meant every word of it then too." Urzoth made a small, broken sound that was half laugh and half something far more raw, and closed the last distance between them. And this time when their lips met, there was no danger crowding the edges of it, no fight still ringing in their blood, only two people who had nearly lost each other, choosing, deliberately and without hesitation, not to let go. The days that followed the failed execution were strange, unsettled ones for Wingate Market. Vance stood before a joint tribunal of the monastery abbot, the human magistrate, and chieftain Steeljaw himself, and the evidence against him was so thorough, so damning, that even his lowland patrons in the garrison abandoned him rather than share in his disgrace. He was stripped of rank and sent south in chains to face the crown's own justice for treason against the treaty, and the two soldiers who had lied under his orders were given lesser sentences in exchange for their full testimony. The treaty signing, delayed by 4 tense days, finally went forward, but not in its old, uneasy form. It was Urzoth, standing before both delegations in the monastery's great stone hall, who spoke first when the negotiations resumed, her voice steady despite the still fading bruise the noose had left at her throat. "This treaty has failed us twice now," she said. "Once when men like Vance found it easy to plot murder under its cover, and long before that, every season some human market master finds it easy to force orc warriors into blood sport for coin, while the treaty says nothing to stop it. I will not sign my clan's name to another year of that silence." Brother Aldous, chastened by how close his beloved neutral ground had come to hosting a massacre, agreed without argument to new terms. The dueling pits at Wingate would be abolished entirely, replaced by sanctioned, voluntary sparring exhibitions that paid fighters fairly and forbade forced participation of any kind. Toll rates were renegotiated more favorably for orc traders. And at Urzoth's quiet insistence, backed by Threk's authority, a new clause was added granting any human who married into a clan family, or any orc who wished to settle permanently on the human side of the pass, full and equal standing under both human and orc law. A small clause, easily overlooked by most of the assembled negotiators focused on toll rates and mining rights, but one that Simon Weston, standing at the back of the hall among the other guards, understood the true weight of the moment he heard it read aloud. He found Urzoth afterward on the monastery's outer wall, looking out over the pass toward the high peaks where her clan's home lay, the autumn wind pulling loose strands of dark hair free of her braid. "You added that clause for me," he said, coming to stand beside her. "I added it," she said, "because I intend to stay at Wingate, near the pass, near the market, and I did not want to spend the rest of my life fighting the monastery's law for the right to do so beside the man I have chosen." She turned to face him fully, and there was no armor in her expression now, nothing guarded or wary, only a fierce and open certainty that made Simon's breath catch. "I am Urzoth Steeljaw. I have fought 100 men and feared none of them. I have never once in all my seasons feared to say what I want. So I will say it plainly, Simon Weston, so there is no mistaking me. I want you. Not as a curiosity, not as some strange story to tell my clan around a winter fire, but as the man I choose above any other who has ever stood before me, if you will have me." Simon's throat was tight, his heart too full for a long moment to manage words at all. "Urzoth," he finally said, I've spent 6 years on this mountain feeling like a man nobody particularly needed for anything more than guarding wagons. Then you looked at me across that pit like I was worth seeing, and every day since has felt like the first real one I've had in longer than I can remember. There's no version of my future I want that doesn't have you standing in the middle of it. So yes, have me. I'm already yours if you'll take what there is of me. There is a great deal of you, Urzoth said, something warm and fierce breaking through into a genuine, radiant smile, and I intend to take every part of it. She kissed him then, slow this time, unhurried, no danger crowding them, no crowd to answer to, only the mountain wind and the long golden light of afternoon settling over the pass, and Simon felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, entirely and completely found. Winter came early to Asheville Pass that year, the first heavy snows sweeping down from the peaks not 2 weeks after the treaty's revised terms were formally sealed. But Wingate Market did not close down entirely the way it usually did once the trade season ended. With the new clause in place, a handful of the Steeljaw clan's warriors and traders elected to stay through the cold months rather than retreat fully to the high valleys, strengthening the fragile new peace by simple, stubborn presence, and Urzoth was chief among them. She and Simon took a small stone cottage near the monastery's outer orchard, granted to them by Brother Aldous himself in gratitude for all they had risked to expose Vance's treason, its low-beamed ceiling and thick walls a welcome shelter against the mountain winter. It was a modest place, a single main room with a hearth, a loft above for sleeping, a lean-to out back for the 2 horses Urzoth insisted on keeping despite Simon's gentle teasing that an orc warrior hardly needed a stable of her own. But it was theirs, chosen freely, and to Simon it felt grander than any keep. Their courtship through those first snowbound weeks was unhurried, in a way neither of them had expected to want, after a season that had thrown them together through danger and violence and stolen, desperate moments. There was a particular pleasure, Simon found, in simply being allowed to be slow with her splitting firewood together in companionable silence, Urzoth insisting on swinging the axe herself and laughing when Simon pretended to be offended at being denied the chore. Long evenings by the hearth where she taught him the rough edges of the Steeljaw clan tongue, and he taught her, badly, the lowland ballads his mother used to sing. The quiet, charged evenings when her hand would find his across the small table, and neither of them would say anything at all, simply content to sit in the warmth of each other's presence after a season of denying themselves exactly this. It was on one such evening, deep in the heart of that first winter, with snow piled thick against the cottage windows and the fire burned down to low embers, that the last of the careful distance between them finally, fully dissolved. Urzoth had been quiet all evening, watching Simon mend a harness strap with the same patient, unhurried focus he brought to everything, and when he finally set the work aside and looked up to find her watching him, something in her expression made his pulse quicken. "What is it?" he asked. "I have been thinking," she said slowly, "of all the seasons I spent believing no one would ever look at me the way you do. Believing I would spend my life either feared or wagered upon, never simply wanted." She rose from her seat, crossing the small room to kneel before him, her hands coming to rest on his knees, and Simon's breath caught at the raw vulnerability in her dark eyes, so different from the fierce warrior the market had feared, and so much more precious for it. "I do not wish to wait any longer to show you how much that has meant to me." "Urzoth," Simon said, voice rough. "You don't have to." "I know I do not have to," she said, a small smile curving her mouth. "I wish to." "There is a difference, Simon Weston, and I would think a man so stubbornly determined never to force anything from anyone would understand it better than most." He did understand it, and when she reached up and drew him down to her, when their mouths met in the firelight, slow and deep and unhurried, all the long season of careful restraint finally, gently gave way. There was nothing desperate in it this time, nothing born of danger or fear of losing each other. Only two people who had earned this, who had chosen each other freely and completely, discovering the particular tenderness that came from finally, safely, being allowed to want without holding anything back. Simon's hands were careful with her, reverent, mapping the strength of her shoulders, the warmth of her skin beneath the leathers she finally, slowly let him unlace. And Urzoth, for all her fearsome reputation across 100 markets, was startlingly gentle in return, guiding him with a patience that made him understand, more fully than any words could have, exactly how much trust she was placing in him. The fire burned low and warm beside them, and the snow piled soft and silent against the windows, and in the small stone cottage at the edge of Wingate Market, Simon Weston and Urzoth Steeljaw finally, fully, became each other's entirely. Afterward, lying tangled together beneath heavy furs while the fire's last embers cast the room in low amber light, Urzoth traced idle patterns against Simon's bare chest with one calloused finger, a contentment in her that he had never seen before, soft and unguarded. "In my clan," she said quietly, "there is a custom. When a warrior chooses a mate, they exchange a mark, not always visible, sometimes only a scar shared between them, sometimes a token carried always. It is meant to say to anyone who sees it that this person belongs to another and is fiercely, permanently claimed." "Do you want that?" Simon asked, propping himself up on one elbow to look at her properly. "I have already claimed you in every way that matters to me," Urzoth said. "But yes, I would like the mark too if you are willing." They exchanged it 3 days later in a small private ceremony witnessed only by Steeljaw and brother Aldous. A thin, deliberate line drawn along the outside of each of their forearms with a heated blade no longer than a finger, healed carefully over the following days into matching pale scars that neither of them ever bothered to hide. It was not a wedding in the human sense, nor precisely a clan binding in the orc sense, but something that belonged only to the two of them, forged in the particular circumstances of who they were and how they had found each other, and it suited them better, Simon thought, than any borrowed tradition could have. Spring came late that year, the mountain snows reluctant to release their grip on Asheville Pass. But when the thaw finally arrived, and the first trade caravans of the new season began winding their way up from the lowlands, Wingate Market opened its gates to find itself changed in ways both large and small. Rourke's old dueling pit stood empty, its wooden rails already being dismantled for firewood at Brother Aldous' order, replaced by a modest sparring ground where fighters human and orc both trained and competed by mutual choice, coin-changing hands fairly, and no one dragged into a ring against their will. Ferris the cloth merchant, chastened by his public humiliation the previous autumn and perhaps genuinely reformed by it, was seen more than once trading amiably with Steeljaw clan women over bolts of good gray wool. And at the edge of the market, in the small stone cottage by the monastery orchard, Simon Weston and Urzoth Steeljaw greeted the new trade season together, no longer a caravan guard and a market spectacle, but something Wingate had never quite seen before and would, in the seasons to come, grow steadily more used to. A settled, devoted pair, equally respected, equally feared and beloved in their own particular ways, who had built between them a life neither had thought possible before that day in the dueling pit, when one had refused to fight the other for anyone's entertainment. Steeljaw visited often that spring, ostensibly on clan business, though Simon suspected correctly that his true purpose was simply to see for himself that his cousin was well and happy, a fact he confirmed with obvious, if gruffly expressed, relief each time he found her laughing beside the human guard she had chosen. "She was always the fiercest of us," Threck told Simon once, over shared cups of the strong mountain ale the Steeljaw traders favored, "but fierce and lonely too often go together in a warrior's life. I did not think to see her this settled, this content." He studied Simon for a long moment, the appraising look of a chieftain weighing a man's worth. You did not fight her for sport that first day. Every man before you did or wished to. She has told me what that meant to her. I only did what seemed right, Simon said. Most men, Threck said, cannot tell the difference between what is right and what is easy when a crowd is watching and coin is on the table. You could. That is worth more to my cousin and to me than any victory you might have won against her in that pit. He raised his cup. Wingate is fortunate to have you both. So is my clan. By the time the following autumn's treaty renewal came around, the changes wrought that first tenth season had settled into simple, unremarkable fact, the sort of quiet transformation that, a year later, hardly anyone thought to remark upon at all, precisely because it had worked so well. Vance's name became a cautionary tale traded among garrison officers about the cost of underestimating both orc pride and human decency alike. Brother Aldous, now visibly aged but deeply satisfied, presided over a treaty signing that passed without incident. The mining rights and toll agreements settled amicably. The old dueling pit clause struck permanently from Wingate's charter. And on the evening after that second, peaceful signing, Simon and Urzoth walked together along the outer wall where they had first spoken so plainly of what they wanted from each other, the mountain wind carrying the first cold bite of the coming winter, the lights of Wingate Market glowing warm and steady in the valley below. "Do you ever think of that first day?" Urzoth asked, her hand comfortable and familiar in his. "The pit, the crowd screaming for blood." "All the time," Simon admitted. "I think about how close I came to just going along with it, the way everyone expected me to. I was so used to keeping my head down, not making trouble." He glanced at her, at the fierce, beautiful, unguarded woman beside him who had somehow become the whole center of his quiet life. "I'm glad something in me finally decided a little trouble was worth it." "So am I," Urzoth said, stopping to face him fully, the last golden light of evening catching in her dark eyes. "You could have won that duel, you know. Everyone assumed you would lose, but I do not think you would have. You are more skilled than you ever let the market believe." "Maybe," Simon said. "Doesn't matter now. Wasn't the fight I wanted to win." "No," Urzoth agreed, stepping close, her palm coming to rest over the pale scar on his forearm that matched her own. "You wanted something better than a victory. You wanted me to matter to you as a person before you ever knew what I might become to you." She smiled, soft and certain. "You have no idea, Simon Weston, how rare that made you, how rare it still makes you, in a world so ready to see my people as either monsters or spectacles and nothing between." "I only ever saw you," Simon said simply. "From the very first day, just you." She kissed him then, unhurried, on the wall above the market that had once demanded they fight each other for its amusement and now, however slowly, however imperfectly, was learning something better. And below them, the lanterns of Wingate flickered on one by one against the gathering dark. A market at the head of a mountain pass where humans and orcs had once only warred and wagered now, in its own hard-won and quietly hopeful way, beginning to learn how to live and love together. They stood there a long while, neither in any hurry to move, the whole wide mountain night settling comfortably around them. And when they finally turned to walk home together to the small stone cottage by the orchard, it was without a single word needed between them. Only the easy, certain closeness of two people who had found in each other exactly what they had never quite dared to hope for, and had no intention, now that they held it, of ever letting go.